They say betrayal is something you feel, a cold shift in your gut, a whisper you can't quite name. For me, it was a timestamp. I was in Portland on business, a bland hotel room, beige walls, bitter coffee, running my usual remote home diagnostics before bed. I treat my home like a server, logs, backups, security audits. People lie. Data doesn't. At 7:43 p.m., my father's phone connected to our Wi-Fi. 3 minutes later, my wife's. Anna was supposed to be across town, helping a friend with wedding planning. The log showed 2 door entries, his code, then hers. No one left in between. The living room camera confirmed it. They walked in together, Anna carrying wine. My father laughed. Not his usual dry chuckle, but the warm laugh I hadn't heard in years. At 8 p.m., the upstairs hallway camera went dark. Someone had manually shut it off. Even without video, I could see what was happening. Anna's smartwatch showed a heart rate spike to 135 BPM at 8:03, not from laundry. At 8:29, the camera came back. The hallway was empty. I stopped watching, not from shock, but because I already knew. The skill of gathering evidence comes with a curse. You rarely get to pretend you're wrong. I saved the footage, exported the logs, encrypted the lot. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't say a word. Instead, I opened my notebook and made 2 columns. Protect yourself and find out why. The first meant legal safeguards, freezing accounts, and preserving proof. The second was harder, understanding why my father, my anchor since Mom's death, was in my home with my wife. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. People who know they're being watched are careful. People who think they're safe will make mistakes. I wanted those mistakes. I wanted them comfortable. I poured a glass of cheap hotel bourbon, watching the city sink into rain. At 8:47 p.m., 200 miles north, my wife and my father were likely in my bed. I could have driven home, staged the scene everyone talks about for years. But scenes are noise. Precision wins wars. The truth was mine already. The timing was theirs. And timing was about to become my weapon. Before everything, our life looked ordinary. I'd been married to Anna for 3 years. We had a modest house in North Seattle, a mix of IKEA furniture and the few things we'd splurged on together. Saturday morning runs, late-night Netflix binges, and my growing cybersecurity startup kept me busy. My father, Jack, was part of the routine. Since my mother died, he'd become a fixture in our lives. Sunday dinners, unannounced visits, offering to fix anything that so much as squeaked. He was 68, the kind of man who wore the same leather watch every day and drank his coffee black. In hindsight, there were signs. Little things I brushed aside because they didn't fit the picture I wanted to see. Jack started showing up more often when I wasn't home. He'd drop by on weekday afternoons, claiming he was bored. Anna began helping him with his bills, just while you're working. At the time, it seemed harmless. My father wasn't tech-savvy, and Anna was organized. But there was more. Jack had begun forgetting things. He'd mix up days, misplace his keys, leave the TV on at night. Once, I found his email account locked because he'd tried the wrong password too many times. Strange for a man who'd drilled into me, since I was a teenager, never to write down or forget a password. I told myself it was just age catching up with him. Anna never complained about his visits. In fact, she seemed to enjoy them. They'd sit at the kitchen table, talking about books or movies, while I worked in the garage. I saw it as family bonding, the kind of closeness I thought was healthy. I didn't question why she sometimes dressed up on days he came over, or why she'd bake when she just happened to expect him. Looking back, the truth was obvious. I'd confused habit with safety. When life feels steady, you stop running system checks on the people closest to you. You assume their routines protect you. But habits don't lie. They just hide things in plain sight. I remember one evening in early spring, a month before Portland, when I came home early from a client meeting. Jack's truck was in the driveway. Inside, they were sitting close together at the kitchen island, looking at something on her laptop. They both jumped a little when I walked in, but Anna smiled and said they were sorting through old family photos. I didn't ask to see them. I just took her word for it. Now, replaying that memory, I know what I should have done. Taken the laptop, looked at the screen, noted the files. But I didn't, because the idea that my wife and my father could cross that line seemed absurd. Trust blinds you more effectively than any lie. In cybersecurity, we have a rule. Never assume a system is secure just because it's been quiet. Sometimes, Silence means the breach has already happened, and the intruder is just patient. That was our life then, calm, familiar, and already compromised. The real unraveling began with an anomaly. Not a raised voice, not a suspicious glance, a data point. I'd set up alerts for unusual activity on our home network months earlier. Mostly, it was to catch neighbors' devices trying to piggyback off our Wi-Fi. But one Wednesday night, while I was in my office working late, my phone buzzed with 2 notifications, a new device connecting and one of my home security cameras going offline. The first was my father's phone. That alone wasn't strange, he had the passcode. The second was different. The upstairs hallway camera went dark at exactly 7:59 p.m. It stayed offline for 40 minutes before reconnecting. When the feed returned, the hallway was empty. That same night, Anna's fitness tracker logged an unusual spike, a heart rate jumping from 74 to 136 beats per minute between 8:02 and 8:06 p.m. She hadn't been to the gym. There were no logged workouts, no walks, no runs. I pulled the raw network logs. At 8:04 p.m., the upstairs smart lamp flicked on for 21 minutes. At 8:28, it shut off. At 8:29, the hallway camera came back online. I didn't say anything. Instead, I archived the data. Screenshots, JSON exports, metadata backups. I knew from experience, a single suspicious event can be explained away. But a pattern? A pattern is a noose that tightens with every occurrence. The next day, I found something odd in our bedroom, my father's Hamilton wristwatch. It was resting on the nightstand, its leather strap coiled neatly like it had been placed there with intention. Jack never took off that watch except when sleeping, and even then, it was always in his own room. When I asked Anna, she said he must have forgotten it while we were going through boxes of your mom's old things. She said it lightly, almost dismissively, as if the answer didn't need further questioning. I nodded, even smiled. But later that night, I opened my secure server, uploaded the camera backup, and hashed the files to lock them against tampering. It's strange. The moment you begin suspecting the truth, you start noticing everything. The way she'd glance at her phone and tilt the screen away. The subtle pauses in conversation when I walked into the room. The sudden need to go for a drive in the middle of the afternoon. Still, I stayed silent. I had no interest in half-confrontations or emotional explosions. In my field, acting too early means losing the trail. Let people think you're asleep. They'll relax. Let them relax. They'll make mistakes. And mistakes, I was learning, were their specialty. That week, I started a separate drive labeled only with a date. Inside, I built a folder tree by event, network logs, physical evidence, camera footage, metadata. It was methodical and personal. Every file was a brick, and I was building a wall they wouldn't see until it was too late. The data was speaking. All I had to do was keep listening. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't even let them know I was paying attention. Instead, I called my attorney. We'd worked together for years. He knew my preference for facts over drama. I laid out the bare details. Evidence of possible infidelity, proof of intentional tampering with security devices, and a very specific concern that my father might be manipulated. I asked him to walk me through the divorce clause in our prenup, the legal definition of infidelity in Washington state, and how emotional unfitness could factor in. His advice was simple: preserve evidence. Avoid provocation. Do not change your patterns. He also suggested I keep my finances and shared decisions frozen until I knew the full scope. That night, I moved certain accounts into my name alone, transferred sensitive files from my work laptop to an encrypted external drive, and set alerts for any unusual transactions tied to our home address. At the same time, I made a separate appointment for my father with a neurologist. On paper, it was just a routine checkup for memory concerns. In reality, I wanted a professional assessment of whether his recent forgetfulness was more than age. If Jack's mental faculties were slipping, he'd be far more vulnerable to suggestion and far less capable of fully understanding the choices he was making. Anna tried to talk about taking a vacation. "We need a break," she said over dinner, smiling in that careful way that meant she'd already decided where she wanted to go. I suggested we wait until my work schedule cleared. She agreed too quickly. I've learned that real agreement in marriage comes after discussion. When one partner accepts instantly, especially someone as opinionated as Anna, it's usually because they've shifted their focus elsewhere. I kept my routine exactly the same. I left for work at the same time, came home at the same time, answered questions with the same measured tone. The last thing I wanted was to trigger suspicion that I was watching. I also started running silent tests on our security system. I'd briefly disable a camera, then check the logs to see if anyone noticed or commented. I placed small objects, a pen, a mug, my watch, in slightly different spots in the bedroom before leaving for work, just to see if they moved. They often did. The truth was becoming clearer. Whatever was happening between them wasn't just an accident, and it wasn't stopping. In cybersecurity, we have what's called a honeypot, a system designed to attract attackers, to watch how they operate without letting them know they're being studied. That's exactly what my home had become. I was the administrator. They were the intruders. And every day they stayed comfortable inside my network. They gave me more to work with. Evidence only matters when you can present it at the right moment. I'd been collecting for weeks, watching them build their pattern without realizing I was tracking every move. But this time, the opportunity landed in my lap. It was a Friday evening. I was driving back from Portland, a few hours ahead of schedule, when I checked my phone at a rest stop. The tracking app I'd installed on my father's phone, under the pretense of helping him keep from losing it, pinged. He was at my house. 10 minutes later, a second ping. His location had shifted to the master bedroom. I opened my security dashboard. Right on cue, the upstairs hallway camera went dark. I felt the familiar steadiness settle over me. The same feeling I get before presenting to high-stakes clients or entering a live network breach. This wasn't the moment to get emotional. This was the moment to execute. I parked 2 streets away and launched a remote screen mirroring session on my phone. For the next 16 minutes, I watched their devices connect and disconnect from the network. I listened to the silence of a house that should have been empty. Then I drove up the street, slow and quiet, and pulled into the driveway like it was any other night. The key turned in the lock. The door clicked shut behind me. They didn't hear it. I walked up the stairs, phone recording in my pocket. When I reached the bedroom door, I didn't push it open. I simply stood there for 3 seconds, long enough to know I could. Then I walked away, down to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. A few minutes later, they came down together. Jack's face was pale. Anna tried for a smile that collapsed halfway. "Sit," I said. My voice was calm, flat. "Both of you." We sat at the kitchen table, me on one side, them on the other. I placed a small flash drive in the center and slid it forward. "That's the last month," I said. "Logs, footage, device activity. Everything I need." Neither spoke. "I'm not here to yell," I continued. "I'm here to understand. And I'm giving you both exactly one chance to tell me the truth without me having to use what's on that drive." Anna's eyes flicked to Jack. He looked down at his hands. She spoke first, starting with the usual deflections: loneliness, miscommunication, my long hours at work. I let her talk, my face unreadable. When she finished, I reached into my bag and placed a second stack of papers on the table. "Then maybe you can explain this," I said. It was printouts of text messages between her and Jack, arranging to disable the cameras, mentioning Tuesday's signing, and discussing making sure he doesn't forget. Jack swallowed hard. "I thought it was about insurance," he muttered. I leaned back. "We'll get to that," I said, because now I realized this wasn't just about infidelity. This was about something else entirely. We sat at that kitchen table like 3 strangers in a public place. No shouting, no slammed fists, just the quiet scrape of chair legs against the floor when they shifted. Anna kept her eyes on the flash drive, as if looking at me might force her to say something she couldn't take back. Jack leaned forward, elbows on the table, his hands clasped like he was bracing for a verdict. "I don't care about excuses," I said. "I care about facts." Anna's voice was barely above a whisper. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She used words like loneliness, confusion. "You were so busy." She kept glancing at me, gauging my reaction, probably hoping for some flare of emotion that might give her leverage. I gave her nothing. When she was done, I reached into my bag and placed a series of printouts in front of them, screenshots of messages, snippets of call logs, calendar entries. The language was unambiguous, arranging meetings, disabling cameras, and something that caught my attention more than anything else: mentions of documents. "What documents?" I asked. Anna didn't even pause. "Insurance forms. For him," she said, tilting her head toward Jack. The answer came too fast, too smooth. I'd seen that kind of speed before. in liars who had rehearsed a fallback explanation. I slid another page forward, a scanned draft of a property gift agreement, transferring a portion of my father's secondary house to Anna. The draft bore my father's signature, but the date had been altered in digital ink. Jack stared at the paper, his jaw tightening. I thought it was something else, he said quietly. Anna opened her mouth, then closed it. I leaned back in my chair. This is where you both need to understand something, I said. What you've done here isn't just personal. This isn't about feelings or bad decisions. This is about property law, fraud, and the mental capacity of a potential grantor. That's the language a prosecutor will use. Jack's eyes flickered with confusion, then something else, fear. Anna's gaze hardened for a second before she looked down again. I kept my tone level. From this moment forward, every conversation between you two happens in my presence. You will not meet alone. You will not exchange documents. And you will not attempt to fix any of this without legal counsel. I wasn't bluffing. The drive in my pocket contained not just proof of their affair, but proof of their attempts to manipulate an elderly man's assets. In my world, that's not a family dispute. That's a criminal investigation waiting to happen. The air between us was thick, but I stayed still, my hands flat on the table. If they were expecting an explosion, they weren't going to get it. Explosions burn bright and fast. I needed something that would burn slow and consume everything in its path. This was no longer just my marriage on the line. This was my father's future and his dignity. And that, I realized, was worth far more than revenge. By the next morning, my plan was already in motion. The first call I made was to my attorney. I explained everything, not just the affair, but the attempted property transfer, the altered date, and my concerns about my father's mental clarity. He didn't hesitate. You need to secure his assets immediately. Durable power of attorney, medical evaluation, and a formal fraud prevention notice with his bank. The second call was to the neurologist's office. I moved my father's routine checkup forward to that afternoon. When I told him it was just to make sure his memory lapses weren't serious, he agreed without suspicion. Anna, of course, wasn't invited. While Jack was with the doctor, I sat in the lobby with my laptop, drafting formal notifications to every financial institution he used. The language was simple: no property transfers, withdrawals, or account changes without joint authorization from both of us. Once those letters were sent, I knew the gates were closed. The evaluation results weren't immediate, but the neurologist confirmed what I suspected. Jack's short-term memory was slipping. Not enough to declare full incapacity, but enough to question his understanding of complex agreements. That would matter later, both legally and strategically. That night, I went through our home with fresh eyes. I checked every drawer, cabinet, and storage box. I found 3 unsigned forms for transferring title on my father's truck, hidden in the bottom of Anna's filing cabinet. Her handwriting was on the sticky notes attached, for Tuesday, and needs both signatures. I took photos, replaced them exactly as they were, and moved on. Meanwhile, I maintained the illusion of normalcy. Dinner at the table, polite conversation, even casual jokes. I could feel Anna watching me, looking for cracks. But the more calm I stayed, the more nervous she became. Jack didn't say much. I noticed him avoiding eye contact with her now, as if he wasn't sure where her loyalty lay anymore. Or maybe he finally understood it wasn't with him. I doubled down on monitoring. The network logs became my diary. Every device that entered or left the house, every time a camera went offline, every burst of bandwidth, all documented, all stored in multiple encrypted backups. My honeypot approach was working. They still thought they were operating in shadows, but I was recording every move. I wasn't thinking in days anymore. I was thinking in moves, like a chess game where your opponent doesn't know you've already seen 10 turns ahead. And if there's one thing I've learned about people like Anna, it's that they always push for one final, desperate play before the end. I was ready for it. It happened on a Tuesday, the day marked on those sticky notes I'd photographed weeks earlier. By then, I'd been watching them long enough to recognize the build-up to something. The silences between them had grown longer, but not empty. They were waiting for a moment when I wasn't looking. I made sure they thought they had it. That morning, I told Anna I had a late meeting downtown. I left the house with my briefcase and laptop bag, even stopped by my office for an hour to keep the routine believable. What she didn't know was that I'd parked 2 blocks away afterward, laptop open, phone synced to the home network's live feeds. At 10:42 a.m., Jack's truck pulled into the driveway. 2 minutes later, Anna opened the front door for him. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just familiarity. I watched the feed from the living room camera, the one I'd reconfigured so its LED light stayed off even when active. They moved to the dining table, where Anna spread out a stack of papers. I recognized them instantly, the unsigned vehicle transfer forms, and something else I hadn't seen before, a pre-filled deed transfer, this time for one of my father's savings accounts. Jack seemed unsure. He rubbed the back of his neck, leaned back in his chair, looked toward the hallway. Anna leaned forward, speaking in a low voice I couldn't hear, but her body language was all persuasion. A pen lay between them. At 10:58, I walked up the driveway. I didn't bother being quiet. The sound of my key in the lock froze them both where they sat. I stepped inside, phone in one hand, camera app open and recording. "Go ahead," I said, nodding toward the papers. "Let's finish this." Anna's eyes widened. Jack's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I walked to the table, picked up the top page, and turned it toward my camera. "Attempted transfer without full consent," I said clearly, so it was on video, accompanied by prior evidence of manipulation. Both parties present. Anna reached for the papers. I pulled them away. "No," I said flatly. "You don't get to destroy evidence." Jack looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You said," he began, but stopped. I set the stack back on the table, slid it into a folder, and zipped it into my bag. "You're both done," I said. "There's nothing left to discuss." Anna stood, her voice sharp now. "You think you can just—" "Yes," I said, cutting her off. "And I already have." Because this wasn't just a moral victory anymore. This was a case file, complete, time-stamped, admissible. Every log, every video, every altered document. And now, a live-recorded attempted fraud, right in my dining room. The game wasn't over yet, but the board was mine. By the next morning, my plan had shifted from defense to offense. The folder containing the forged and pre-filled documents was locked in my safe, alongside the flash drives, printed logs, and copies of every recorded conversation. I had what most people in my field never get: complete, layered evidence of intent, action, and opportunity. I started the day with 2 emails. The first was to my attorney, attaching digital copies of everything with a note. "We are moving forward with both divorce and potential criminal charges. Prepare filings immediately." The second was to a private investigator I'd worked with before, a former police detective who understood both surveillance law and the subtle art of staying invisible. I sent him the timeline and asked him to verify every piece of my evidence with independent observation, in case Anna's lawyer tried to challenge chain of custody. By noon, I was in a conference room downtown, sliding a neatly organized binder across the table to my attorney. He flipped through it silently, stopping at the altered date on the property transfer draft. He gave a low whistle. "This isn't just open and shut for divorce. This is felony territory." We discussed strategy. The plan was to file the divorce petition first, citing infidelity and financial misconduct, then hand over the fraud-related evidence to the county prosecutor only after the civil case was secured. That way, Anna would be locked into her statements before the criminal side hit her. As for Jack, I wasn't sure yet. I'd made copies of the neurologist's notes, enough to demonstrate diminished capacity, which could shield him from the harshest legal fallout. My goal wasn't to destroy him. It was to keep him out of Anna's reach. That night, I came home to a silent house. Anna was in the kitchen, scrolling her phone. Jack's truck was nowhere in sight. She looked up when I walked in, but I could tell from her eyes she didn't know yet that the ground under her had shifted. I let her think nothing had changed. We ate dinner in the usual politeness. She talked about mundane things, errands, a recipe she wanted to try, as if we hadn't been in a silent war for weeks. Afterward, I went to my office, closed the door, and wrote a single sentence in my notebook: "Deliver the blow when they've stopped looking for it." The filings would go in by Friday morning. By Monday, Anna's entire legal landscape would change. And once the prosecutor's office saw the compiled evidence, there would be no path back for her. It wasn't revenge. It was execution. Friday came without fanfare. The sky over Seattle was the color of wet concrete, and the air carried that sharp chill that means autumn has decided to stay. I dressed as I always did for client meetings, pressed shirt, dark jacket, and left the house without a word to Anna. By 9:15 a.m., the divorce petition was filed with the court. Grounds: infidelity and financial misconduct. Attached were excerpts from my evidence, just enough to establish pattern and intent without giving away the entire arsenal. My attorney assured me the rest would come out during discovery, timed to maximum effect. At 10:30, we walked the same binder of evidence to the county prosecutor's office. I watched the deputy DA's face as he scanned the property transfer drafts, the altered dates, the camera stills, and the recorded attempted signing at my dining table. "We'll be opening a formal investigation," he said, his voice even but his eyes sharp. "And we'll need statements from both your father and your wife." That was the moment the trap closed. By the time I returned home that evening, Anna had already been served with the divorce papers. I found her in the living room, the envelope open on her lap. Her expression was a strange mix of defiance and disbelief, like someone who's just realized the rules of the game were different from what they'd been playing. "You planned this," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied. No point denying it. Jack wasn't there. He'd moved into a short-term apartment I'd arranged through one of my contacts, away from her and under my supervision until the legal dust settled. I'd explained enough for him to agree, though I spared him some details. He didn't need to see the full picture to understand that Anna had been using him. Over the next 2 weeks, everything unfolded exactly as it should. The investigators' independent verification sealed the authenticity of my evidence. The neurologist's assessment gave Jack protection from the worst of the criminal implications. And Anna's own recorded words tied her directly to both the affair and the fraudulent property schemes. She tried reaching out twice, once by text, once through a mutual friend. I didn't respond. Communication now belonged to lawyers and courtrooms. The final hearing came 6 months later. The judge awarded me full control of my father's financial affairs, granted the divorce with no alimony, and referred the fraud evidence to the criminal docket. I left the courthouse without looking back. People talk about closure like it's an emotional state. For me, closure was a series of completed steps, each one reducing her influence to zero. By the end, there was nothing left for her to touch, nothing left for her to manipulate. I still see my father every Sunday. We don't talk about her. Some silences aren't empty. They're protective.